Now for this week's sermon. This week's Seder Shemini, we have a terrible tragedy that occurs. We have a long-awaited day. The Jewish nation are ecstatic. They've completed the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the home for God's presence. For 7 days, Moshe had prepared for its consecration. And now on the 8th day, the 1st of Nisan, a year since they received their first command, 2 weeks prior to leaving Egypt, the divine presence descends into the Mishkan. The flame consumes the offerings in the new sanctuary. Our sages tell us it was the most joyous day since creation. And then tragedy strikes. The Torah tells us Aaron's sons Nadav and Abihu each took a fire pan. They put fire in it. They laid incense on it. And they offered an alien fire before God, which he had not commanded them. A fire came forth from him and consumed them. They combusted spontaneously. They died in God's presence. And Moshe says to Aaron, oh my gosh, this is what God meant when he said, I will be sanctified through those close to me. Before all the people, I will be glorified. Moshe assumed it meant him and Aaron. They meant Aaron's sons. The Torah tells us, by Yidayim Aaron, Aaron was silent. Rashi tells us, Moshe is saying, I knew the divine home would be sanctified by those beloved by God, but I didn't think it would be your sons. I see they're greater than even you and me. He tries to give meaning. He attempts to provide insight into this tragedy. Somehow he explains their death is to do with the holiness of their souls, the powerful energy of the sacred space on this sacred day. Just like nuclear power, it can be deadly dangerous when it goes wrong. And what does Aaron respond? By Yidayim Aaron, Aaron was silent. Moshe's words are met with complete silence. The man who had been the spokesman for Moshe can no longer speak himself. Why was he silent? Why did he not respond? What was this silence? Was silence submission, protest, pain so deep he couldn't express it? Can words not capture the profundity of the grief? Or was it that he had such deep pain that he had no need for answers? Or maybe all of the above and more. And Rashi tells us he was rewarded for his silence, that he was taught the new law, that you couldn't be intoxicated with wine when you do the divine service. How was this a reward? And had he responded verbally, would God not have addressed him directly? Why was it his silence that warranted that God should speak to him directly and him alone? The Kloisenberger Rebbe was one of the great Hasidic masters of the last generation, the Rebbe of Sanz Kloisenberg. He'd become one of the youngest Rebbes in Europe. He had thousands of followers in the city of Klausenberg, Romania, before the Second World War. Once the Nazis invaded, they began to celebrate the defeat of the Jews in their usual disgusting, sadistic manner. They gathered the Jews in a circle in the center of town. They paraded their Rebbe, Rabbi Halberstam, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, in the very center. They began to taunt him and tease him. They pulled his beard and they pushed him around. These vile soldiers trained their guns on this holy man. And the commander said, tell us, Rabbi, he sneered, do you really believe that you are the chosen people? The soldiers guarding the crowd howled in laughter, but the Rebbe did not. In a serene voice, he answered loud and clear, most certainly. The officer was enraged. He lifted his rifle above his head and crashed it down on the Rebbe's head, and the Rebbe fell to the ground. There was rage in his voice. Are you still the chosen people? He yelled. Once again, the Rebbe nodded his head, said, yes, we are. The officer was furious. He kicked the Rebbe in the chin. He said, you stupid Jew, you lie here on the ground, beaten, humiliated in a puddle of blood. How can you think you are the chosen people? And with his mouth gushing blood, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, the holy Rebbe, replied, as long as we are not the ones kicking, beating, and murdering innocent people, we are the chosen people. He and his wife Hannah had 11 children. His wife and 10 of his children were murdered in Auschwitz. His eldest son survived the war, but he succumbed to illness in a displaced persons camp after the war before his father even knew he had survived. The Rebbe was left with nothing. His family and his community obliterated. He started again. He rebuilt Jewish communal life, first in the displaced persons camps of Western Europe, and then in the land of Israel, where he founded a neighborhood called Kiryat Sanz and a very well-known hospital called Laniado in Netanya. He rebuilt his family. He married again. He had 7 children, many grandchildren, and he finally passed away in 1994 at the age of 89. One day, a man approached the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and he asked him, tell me, how is it that you and so many of the survivors found the courage and strength not just to survive, but to rebuild, to start families, remain positive, and keep your faith in life, in God, and in humanity. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe answered with 2 words from the Seder and from the bris ceremony, B'damayich chayi. The young man was confused, but then he understood. These words come from Ezekiel. As we said, they're in the Haggadah. They're said at every bris. When I passed by you, I saw you wallowing in your blood. I said to you, through your blood you shall live. Through your blood you shall live. It's an allusion to the time in Egypt, just before we left, when we were commanded to do bris milah, circumcision, and also to bring the Pesach offering and paint the blood on the doorposts. And God says, through the blood of these commandments, the blood of the bris, the covenant, and the blood of the Pesach offering, you shall live. The young man said out loud, thinking he had understood, that the rivers of blood and sacrifice of the survivors of the Shoah have earned them eternal life. Through the blood you shall live. No, said the Rebbe. No. That's not what I meant. But Amaya Chaye, said the Rebbe. The secret is Vayidoim Aaron. But Amayech is from Vayidoim, can also mean silence, in action. From your silence you shall live. In your blood and in your silence. What allows them to live with such gusto? But Amayech Chaye, with that silence of Aaron, we continued to live. What was the Kloisenberger Rebbe saying? Such a profound thing. There are those who respond to pain with words. We try to make sense of tragedy, like Moshe. We try to fit it into some logic, like fitting a square peg in a round hole. We try to apply logic and rational arguments to that which is illogical and irrational. Some use the pain to bid farewell to hope and meaning and purpose and God. While some are trying to turn it into a mathematical equation to box it in logically, others do the same with God and meaning. They impose logical structure, and when events don't fit this structure, they run from it. We should never judge a person who responds to pain, but there's a deeper perspective. Aaron was silent. There are no answers or solutions to unthinkable tragedies. No words can do justice to grief and pain. Silence is the only appropriate response. And interestingly, of course, the modern day response to tragedy is a 1 or 2 minute silence. It's not a silence of passivity or resignation or detachment or despair. It's a silence that comes from an awareness that there are things that we cannot explain or describe. No quill in the world can capture the depth of raw agony. To speak of it desecrates it. The pain is so unfathomable, so great. The only appropriate response is not to try. No words. Silence is the most profound statement of all. I don't understand, but I don't need to. I can respect the depth and the scope of my emotions. I don't need to stop them or switch them off. Silence is transcendence. And paradoxically, this allows us to remain connected to life, to meaning, not from a place of logic or rational thinking, but a place of vulnerability and faith in a God who it transcends language, logic, and description. But Amai Chai, said the Kloisenberger Rebbe to this man, in your silence you shall live. Elie Wiesel was once asked, is there a tradition of silence in Judaism? Yes, he answered, but we don't talk about it. In silence, we don't reduce the experience or the infinity of God. It allows us to trust that even as we don't understand, the mystery is so elusive. God, the infinite, unfathomable God, holds our hands at every moment, in every experience. Aaron's silence allowed him to appreciate that God was with him, even in the darkness. How? Why? For what? He didn't need to get his head around it. He embraced the silence of the moment. And what was the resulting reward? That God spoke directly to him and him alone, intimately. Vayidam Aaron was silent. Pain was so deep you could see and hear nothing. No words, no images could capture that depth. You know, it's been a very tough year. Many of us have lost loved ones, family, friends, members of the community, and the future is very uncertain. Grief runs very deep, loss and loneliness and all the challenges. But Damayachai, when we recall just 2 days ago on Yom Hashoah, the horrors of the Holocaust, when we face tragedies in today's world, we find strength in the powerful words of the Rebbe of Klausenberg. But Damayachai, find the courage to move forward in the silence we experience in the presence of infinity. We have no answers. We have silence. But in our silence, we live, we love, and we even sing. And we celebrate the birth of the modern state of Israel 73 years ago this week. And with it, the hopes of the millennia and the aspirations of our people. And we know that very soon we will witness the day when God will destroy death forever and wipe away the tears from all faces. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.